There's a New South Wales Labor MP who wanted to be here tonight, but unfortunately he's tied up with New South Wales Labor State Conference and he sends his apologies. For anyone who hasn't been here, Politics in the Pub is a joint effort of Goulburn Labor and Goulburn Greens. We've been running these for about a year now, I think, with two. Yeah, okay, cool. And yeah, it's been good to see people turn out on a Monday night and to discuss issues that are affecting all of us. These things happen on the third Monday of every month, so it's great that you could turn up this month. And next month's topic, I believe, is going to be on foster care and the state that that's in at the moment. And so that should be a good one as well. But to the business at hand, and if you want to keep up with Politics in the Pub, head to the Politics in the Pub Facebook page or the Goulburn Greens Facebook page. It's all there. You can keep up with that as to when we're having these. And if you've got any questions about what the Goulburn Labor or Goulburn Greens are up to, feel free to speak to myself or anyone who's looks like they're from the Greens or from Labor or anything. Feel free to talk to us, and we'd be happy to talk to you about what we've got going on. Tonight we've got a really, really high quality panel. We've got a number of experts in their field. From left to right, we've got Urs Waterland, who's from the Goulburn Group. He's the president of the Goulburn Group, I believe, and they've done a lot of great work in our community over the last however many years they've been active, and so that's been really great to see, especially from my perspective as a young person. We've got Jeremy Buckingham, MLC, who is a New South Wales Greens Member of Parliament, who has been good enough to come down and give us his time tonight. We've got Prue Goward, MP, Member for Goulburn, who's also been good enough to give us her time tonight, given she has Parliament tomorrow. We've got Dimity Taylor from the Australian Wind Alliance, who's, again, travelled from Bannister to give us her time tonight. And Peter Fraser, who's heading up the Goulburn Group's Clean Energy for Goulburn initiative, which is, I'm sure everyone's watching very excitedly to see how they go with their big project with the solar farm. So I'm really, really keen to see how that's going. We just thought we'd point out that if everyone could please keep their questions and comments tonight as respectful and kind as possible. There's no point coming in here and getting too fired up and getting into a fight, I suppose. I mean, I know we're in a pub, but let's just keep it respectful, guys. And we thought we'd start off by giving each speaker 5 to 10 minutes to introduce their insight in this area and make some general comments. So without further ado, we'll start with Urs.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for the honor of being the first. I hope I deserve it. I have to get up? Okay, I get up. Maybe we need this thing after all. I don't know. No, I don't need it. Okay. As you can hear, English is not my first language. I have to refer to my notes. Please, I hope you understand. As it's indeed true, I'm the president of the Goulburn Group, which is a community action group. Everyone in this room will know it, and it's a very successful group. But it's actually not my day job, though sometimes it is. I'm by trade, I'm a journalist. I'm a foreign correspondent. I work for overseas media. I report on Australia. For large media in Germany and Switzerland mainly. Therefore, none of the views I'm expressing tonight are those of my employers. Should one be here? No. They're purely personal, though of course my work and my international perspective influence it. I would like to dedicate my 10 minutes to Tony Abbott. I really miss him. For us foreign correspondents in Australia, a country that really is not very important on a global scale, he was the best source of outrageous headlines we have had in years. Who could forget coal is good for humanity? it's not the only expression or action where my colleagues at the news desks in Germany and Switzerland asked me if he really said it or if it was a joke. Of course it's not. Nothing to do with climate change is funny, very much to the contrary. The world was watching with disbelief as Australia dumped the carbon price, cut the renewable energy target and destroyed the Climate Commission, and started a war against renewable energy. Shortly after Mr. Abbott came to power, Australia's large-scale renewable energy industry entered an investment freeze. For the year to March 15, investment was 90% lower than in the previous 12 months. I spoke to German investors from German companies who simply shook their heads and packed up shop. Why? One asked me. I couldn't answer. I might also say that I'm also Australian citizen, so I'm a little bit on both sides. The losers of this policy were and are rural and regional communities, our people here in Goulburn. The ABS estimated at the time that more than 2,000 industry jobs had been lost. Some 590 people were employed full-time in the wind, solar and other renewable industries last year, down from almost 15,000 2 years earlier. Not to speak of the tens of thousands of supporting jobs, contractors, motels, food outlets, cinemas, toy shops. And that's just the existing jobs. Thousands more will not be created. Well, at least not here in Australia. They will go to China, to Spain, to Germany. Germany, their so-called Energiewende, the energy change, the transformation to renewables, is said to have created hundreds of thousands of jobs in the last 2 decades. Whole rural regions, once considered economically terminally ill, got a new lease of life. There is no doubt in my mind the Abbott government, but also some state governments and those parliamentarians who loudly and feverishly protested against the evils of wind energy and the presumed high cost of solar. These people are the biggest exporters of jobs this country has seen in recent history. Generational theft of opportunities. That's what this is. So, am I optimistic that we can achieve the change to renewables here? Yes, I am. But we will achieve it not because of politics and politicians, but despite them. In 2008, the total amount of solar power capacity in Australia was 29,000 kilowatt. Today, it's more than 4.7 million. This is remarkable, even in comparison to the growth in other countries. And it was achieved despite a climate of near universal misinformation. The perpetrators were and are a shocking size of the political class. I deliberately use this term, and the majority of the media. Yes, some incentives did help. We experienced it here very successfully before they were cut because they were too successful. No, this boom mainly happened because we wanted it to happen. We, the people. Last week I interviewed German professor Stefan Rahmstorff for Swiss National Radio. Stefan is one of the most highly regarded climate scientists in Europe. He's also an observer of Australia's climate policy and is currently teaching in Sydney. I asked him why he thinks Australia is so backwards when it comes to moving to renewables. Stefan mentioned only 2 points. First, the influence of the coal industry. And I extend this to the minerals industry in general. The influence it has on policy and politicians is absolutely extraordinary for a first world country, he said. Industry is basically writing their own laws. They virtually have their lackeys in the highest echelons in Canberra. I remind you that Gina Reinhardt's most valuable lobbyist will soon be Deputy PM. Secondly, the media. Stefan has as much disgust for the majority of the Australian media as I do, and I am a journalist myself. Endemic misinformation, fraudulent so-called experts, scientific misrepresentations, he described it. No hope there as long as Rupert Murdoch is still breathing, but it's of course not just him. Getting back to the theme tonight, the answer is not green or red or pale blue, it's us. Democracy in its purest form. Every individual who cares has a role to play in leading this country back on the right path. It is my firm belief that action by individuals and communities, small communities like ours, can bring the change we want. 100% renewables. And it's already happening everywhere. People are standing up and taking the future into their own hands. The Goulburn Group, and Peter will tell you more about this in a minute, the Goulburn Group is just one of many examples how it can be done, though certainly one of the best. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming along. I'm Jeremy Buckingham. I'm a Greens MLC, a member of the Upper House. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet and thank Goulburn Labor, Goulburn Greens, again all of you for coming here. As a Green, you may expect me to stand up here tonight and talk about the environment and climate change. Well, I've only got 5 to 10 minutes and I'd rather talk about the economy because I believe that the decision that the New South Wales coalition government, and Prue is a representative of that government, and the Turnbull coalition government, the decisions they're making right now are one of the greatest strategic blunders in the history of our country. To have two governments that are rabidly anti-science, anti-renewables is... Do I use both of them or just one? Hey? I say it's one of the most catastrophic environmental, but just as importantly, economic blunders in our history. This government in New South Wales needs to be held to account. The O'Farrell and Baird governments have approved more coal in their terms of government than ever approved in the history of New South Wales. The greenhouse gas equivalents, if all that coal was burnt, of the emissions of Russia and India combined. An absolute catastrophe. The heart of our food bowl ripped out from coal mines. The largest expansions in the history of coal mining in this nation approved by the coalition government, a Department of Planning that Prue headed, that bent over backwards to create a planning system that allowed a reckless expansion that threatened the viability of the Hunter region, would see coal mining in Berrima, destroys our food bowl, the water catchments of the Central Coast, the water catchments of Sydney, quite literally undermined for an industry that only employs 15,000 people and is losing thousands and thousands of jobs each year. 28,000 people employed in coal mining in 2008, 2010, at its height, now 15,000. And you never hear the coalition government talk about, oh, well, it's over, coal's over, we need to make a transition. All they do is do the business of the coal sector because it's a revolving door. You cannot tell the difference between the mining lobby and the government. The advisors, the staffers, the MPs, the former MPs move from one to the other seamlessly, and it's completely undermining confidence in the planning system and our democracy. They were going to push coal seam gas out across the state. The only reason they were stopped from doing that is because people got together and said, you are going to poison the future, it's absolutely unnecessary, and Prue and her government were absolutely responsible for that. The largest expansion of coal mining in our history, destroying our food bowl and pushing coal seam gas. Well, the community has said absolutely not. Just this week, the government launched announced its report on the Renewable Energy Action Plan. And New South Wales is a national and international joke when it comes to renewable energy. We are a laughingstock. And while they've been opening the doors to coal lobbyists, taking the political donations from the mining companies, all they've been doing is completely failing to show leadership in terms of renewable energy, putting roadblocks to the development of wind and solar, putting no money in there. They've had wind guidelines that have completely undermined any capacity for the wind industry to get off the ground. They've had no long-term targets as other jurisdictions have. And it's not just internationally where we're losing billions and billions of dollars worth of investment, billions of dollars worth of regional development, tens of thousands of jobs. We're not losing it just internationally, we're losing it to Tasmania, Victoria, South Australia. They are grasping the nettle. We've got a 20% renewable energy target in New South Wales by 2020. Completely inadequate, absolutely abysmal, a complete failure to clean up the planning system, and politicians like Prue Goward who use anti-science and attack wind at every single opportunity. Bronnie Taylor, Angus Taylor, all of these people attacking wind, and yet it's an industry, renewable energy, that's already employing more people in New South Wales than coal. Billions of dollars worth of investment, the future of regional development, providing an income for farmers, and yet they want to attack it, not because it's a bad idea, because their masters in the coal sector want to hang on as long as possible, and so that they can get as much coal out of the ground at bargain basis pricements before they all go bust. And this year will be a year of consequences in coal. They will go bust. Rio Tinto, Coal and Allied, BHP, they are all going to the wall, and this government has failed to create a transition to renewable energy. The Greens believe we should have 100% renewable energy. We can do it by 2030. We need to get behind a mandatory feed-in tariff. We need to get behind an ambitious renewable energy target. And I do believe in the political process and democracy, and the Greens at a federal level, in the lead up to the federal election, will fight tooth and nail to create jobs in the region by regional development, renewable energy, and this area, more than any in New South Wales, will benefit. In 20 years' time, they'll look back and laugh and say, can you believe we elected people who were anti-wind? Can you believe we thought that this industry that's employing our kids, providing training, providing clean, green energy was the future? The New South Wales government scorecard on coal is shameful, and it's only surpassed by its abysmal record on renewable energy.
Well, thank you. And I'm the member for Goulburn, and I'm part of the New South Wales government, and I've never heard a Green speech before. There are just so many errors, it's very difficult to know where to start. But just let me remind you of a couple of things. And I was planning minister, and I knocked back coal mines. So I don't know where that comes from. And do you know why we have most of the state under gas exploration licences? Because of the former Labor government and the corruption. Which was never mentioned by Jeremy, because he doesn't get his preferences. As you know, the exploration licences were issued under Labor. They covered almost all of the state. They charged a lot of money for them, and it was very well understood in both the coal and gas industries that when you're paying millions of dollars for an exploration licence, you expect to get your mine approved, and that's exactly what happened. So we came in. We have the toughest coal seam gas regulations in Australia. He didn't say that either. We have the toughest. You cannot have coal seam gas extraction within 2 kilometres of a residential development. And that is for very good reason, that we considered it to be unsafe and not in the interests of our communities. So I think you've got to come in here with the comparative facts, and the facts are that New South Wales is doing extremely well, both as a renewable energy centre, where we lead the country in large-scale solar. We, as a government, invested $85 million in large-scale solar out of Broken Hill and Nyngan. And we have thousands of households with, I think, a total investment of over $3 billion with solar generation on their own rooftops. So we have a very healthy, I would have thought from this room's point of view, position on this industry. We are playing catch-up. We are playing catch-up against 16 years of corruption, which, in the case of the Southern Highlands coal mine, was an exploration licence deal done between coal companies before we got in. And now we're trying to clean up the mess with the development of proper regulations and measurements so that you know whether it's safe, whether you can extract coal from a region without wrecking the aquifers, whether you know that you can do it without causing terrible health consequences for communities. And let me remind you, historically, coal has been a very big industry. It is certainly being mechanised, and it's certainly true that labour numbers are not what they were. But it was a very big union, still a big union, still has a huge impact on labour politics. And it's very hard for me to sit here hearing somebody making up stories about our association. I was the planning minister. I have never received a donation from a coal company or an exporter. I have not. I have not. You are talking about the ex-planning minister. And I have not. But I can tell you, and we can all name, Labor people who took not just donations, they took millions of dollars in crooked deals. And that's what we're dealing with. That's what we're working back from. And it won't be done overnight, because you can't wreck the biggest state's sovereign risk reputation overnight. You have to do it in a measured way, and you have to defend it with science. And that's what we have done with our aquifer interference policy. That's what we've done with our strategic land use policy. They are all about giving the community, but also industry. Because remember, we still need to employ people. If we are going to use what are still heavily subsidised forms of power, because they're still in their infancy, wind and solar, if we are to use them and to develop those industries, it needs to be cross-subsidised by something. That's why this is a plan, a renewable energy transition plan that won't take overnight. And I don't know whether you can get there by 2030, but I do know that you can't do it overnight without destroying not just the jobs of coal miners and their families, and let me tell you, I got a few letters from them too, and their unions, but you will also destroy the jobs that spin off that. You will also destroy the jobs that have spun off an Australia that has been an exporter of the cheapest energy in the world for 100 years. We like to think of ourselves as a country that was built on the backs of the sheep industry. Actually, we were just as much built on the backs of a coal seam. And that is an enormous transition for Australia to start to make. And we are making it. And you can see with what is happening in China, and we've all now welcomed the demise of companies like Rio Tinto. But that is the world and the world's markets making a declaration about what it thinks of the value of coal. So we are, as I say, the country's leader in solar energy, easily, large-scale solar. We are the country's leader in household energy, solar. Under our regime, despite the nonsense you've just heard, there has been a 4-fold increase in the amount of renewable energy generated in New South Wales. So much for a government that didn't want it and was in bed, this mythical bed that we all get into I've just never seen the bed, never met the people that you would get into bed with. Don't know how you would get into bed with. Because a government needs votes from people, not a handful of foreign shareholders. So of course a good government respects the views of its community and works with the community, respects the need for growth, for jobs, for kids to have a future, but it also respects the needs to protect the environment and ensure there is a long-term future for all of us. And that is the balance that each government in its own way tries to achieve. But as I say, there's been a fourfold increase in renewable energy since we have been in government. We have a plan that we are halfway through implementing, a strategic plan on renewable energy. We have invested enormously, particularly in solar. There are a number of wind projects underway. I have always made it very clear that my concern about wind farms is not wind farms. If electricity users choose to subsidise wind farms through their tariffs, that's great. And that's what we as a country have decided to do. My concern is not wind energy. The country has voted on wind energy. It accepts that there is an increase in our electricity bills because we want to support renewables. That's why we have, as a state, a 20% renewable energy target. That's why the country has a 20% renewable energy target. So that debate's over, whatever is said here. And we have to get there, but don't let anybody tell you we're going backwards. But what I have a concern about is where these turbines are placed. And I think there are many people in this room who understand that concern. There are things we don't know about the impact of wind energy. And unlike people in the upper house, I have constituents who come to me, and I've got a choice. I can tell them they're lying, that they're making it up when they tell me about their health problems, or I can listen to them and say, there's a pattern here of concerns, and I think they are worth pursuing. And the NHMRC actually agrees with that position. That is what they have said. They have said the quality of the research into the health effects of wind farms is so poor, we recommend further research because we actually can't tell you whether wind farms cause the health effects that people are concerned about. That's what they've said. That's not half quoting it, which I notice a lot of people like to do. I'm giving you the summary of the whole import of their position on it. So we don't know. But I am a local member. I am not going to sit there telling good people they're lying because I have a position on wind farms. My job, and probably there's nobody else in this room who has that same job, my job is to listen and represent the concerns of my constituents, and that is what I've done. And I have hundreds and hundreds of constituents who are concerned about the value of their land going down because there are turbines in the middle of it, and it severely, in their view, diminishes their land values. Because we're not talking large-scale agricultural land around here anymore. Anybody who lives in this region has seen how it's changed. It's now a region very focused on Canberra, Tarago full of people who commuting to Canberra, Yass similarly. And many people have bought small lifestyle blocks, not agricultural broad-scale farming, lifestyle blocks, where the value of the farm is in the landscape and the quality of life they feel they have when they're there. And those people are very concerned that their investments that they made are now diminishing in value because they are, in many cases, surrounded by wind farms. So that is my concern. Not wind farms. There are plenty of places in our region where wind farms are perfectly acceptable and are just doing the right thing. But there are other places where there are obviously concerns expressed by local communities where everybody looks out of their window and doesn't like what they see. And it's not enough to say, well, it's better that than a coal mine, because they didn't buy here believing that this would happen to them. So my job as their representative is to represent those concerns. And my job is also to be part of a government that supports renewable energy and recognises the great contribution that solar and wind can make. But we have to get it right, because there is no point in imposing on anybody. I mean, we just talked about the decimation of the Hunter Valley. Oh my God, how terrible for those communities to live in a moonscape. Well, if we feel that's not right, let me remind you it's as equally not right to impose other distortions on other communities. And I guess the problem for this region is that the wind industry relies on those big transmission lines, and this region is close to the major transmission lines, so that's one of the reasons why this region is attractive. But the difficulty for the wind industry is that it's now increasingly having to deal with small block owners who are not there to raise 1,000 sheep or 1,000 head of cattle. They are there for the lifestyle views that they gain from them, and they're not happy. But as I said, there are plenty of other places where this is a very good thing. And what we need is a wind industry that is properly regulated and properly respectful of what happens when you decide to build on a ridgeline which is surrounded by a whole lot of people with 20-hectare blocks. Quite different to building on a ridgeline where you're surrounded by farms with 1,000-hectare acreages. Thank you.
Can I just say something? I just want to say something in addition to that, if I can.
Well, we're going to have comments and questions.
Well, I'd just like to get it in the context of
It would still fit at the end. Just wait till the end, and we'll have all comments and questions then.
Hello. So tonight we're talking about how we can end our reliance on fossil fuels. And of course the answer is pretty simple. We need to build more renewable energy projects, and we need to stop building coal mines and retire our coal mine power stations. But of course things are never that simple. At the moment, wind farms are the quickest, cheapest way we currently have to replace coal-fired power with large-scale renewable energy pumping into our electricity grid. They create regional jobs, both directly and indirectly in the wider community. These jobs are both during their construction and in their ongoing operation. Wind farms provide huge amounts of electricity and typically pay themselves off energy-wise in less than a year. They are highly compatible with agriculture and occupy only a tiny amount of productive agricultural land. But wind has been highly controversial in Australia, as I'm sure you all know. I think it is really important to look closely at what is causing the controversy, so we can try to find ways to reduce the barriers to such important energy sources. I live 1.7 kilometres away from the Gullen Range wind farm. That's really close. I can see 4 wind farms from our house. I'm surrounded by wind towers. I do not receive any money from the wind farm, and you know what? I like that wind farm being there. I live on a 20-acre block, a small block. I think it is quite majestic and beautiful. I hear it sometimes, but not often, and the noise doesn't bother me. I sleep well at night, and I have no negative health effects from the wind turbines. Of course, this is anecdotal evidence, but our National Health and Medical Research Centre seems to think that this lack of negative health effects would be unsurprising. I love talking to my kids about how the wind turbines produce electricity for us to use without ruining our environment. I think this point became all the clearer for them as we drove past lots of big dirty coal mines in the Hunter Valley over the summer. I also love that we have some new neighbours who have happily bought a property, a small property, to live there with their family and small children, and that is even closer to the wind farm than us. I'm sure these new neighbours would have been happier if they had managed to get a discount on their house and farm because it was close to a wind farm. But they didn't. They didn't because enough people know that it is not a problem to live near a wind farm. In fact, it can be quite pleasant. I know quite a few other people in my neighbourhood are also quite happy living so close to the Gullen Range wind farm. But there are also some who do not. I think there is a fair chance you may have heard some anecdotes from these people in various media sources or conversation. I think it is really important to listen to the concerns of these opponents of this and other wind farms to see where improvements can be made. But what is even more interesting and important to look at is why they have these concerns in the first place, and what can we do to reduce their burden of concern and hopefully prevent others from carrying the same burden of concern with future wind farms. A lot of the reason many people are concerned about wind farms comes down to the methods of communication, consultation and benefit sharing that the wind companies are using, particularly in the planning stages. During the development stage of the projects, there's a lot of secrecy and confusion for landholders around contracts. This sets up a feeling of distrust within the community. There is minimal meaningful consultation with the community, and often community requests are overruled at a higher level. There is also only tokenistic support given to neighbours of the wind farm, which is a recipe for community division. There are really good examples and models of wind farms with good and effective community communication and consultation. The type of consultation that gives communities meaningful input into many important aspects of the wind farm and gives them a stake in their future. There are also excellent models of how the financial benefits of a wind farm can be shared more equitably among the entire community rather than just the hosts of turbines. The pinnacle of these models actually promotes community ownership of the wind farms, where community members have shares in the company, so are invested in wanting to see it thrive. These models are tried and tested, but sadly, they are rarely used in Australia. I'm a member of the Australian Wind Alliance because I agree with its core principles and the way they work with stakeholders to get a better deal for regional communities. Not only do I want more wind farms to be built, but I want them to be developed properly. I want meaningful community input into their planning and development, and I want communities to meaningfully share in the financial benefits that the wind farm brings. I support the Wind Alliance in their strong efforts to get good models of communication and resource sharing legislated. I want to see the New South Wales Government facilitate wider benefit sharing, not just obstacles in the path of good projects. If these things were legislated, not only would Australia and the world benefit from a drop in carbon emissions, but fewer communities would have to suffer the stress and division that has been a part of my neighbourhood. It is great to see some wind companies starting to do their community engagement better. It is also great to see governments like the ACT requiring a high standard of community engagement for all wind farm tenders in their clean energy auctions. It is not just a feel-good idea. It makes good financial sense to work with a community rather than to battle them through court every step of the way. It makes good political sense to support our community to transition with less disruptions into the clean energy age. Although I speak about these aspects in relation to wind farms, they are also just as important with other large-scale renewable energy projects, such as solar. It would be a shame for us all to be denied the benefits of renewable energy projects just because a few key stakeholders don't know how to communicate or share. This need for good communication applies to the community as well. We need to allow people the space to challenge their opinions. We certainly don't allow people to even consider another opinion if all we do is ridicule them for having a different opinion to us. We need to be civil in our discussions, but we do need to have these discussions, and we need to discuss facts, not spin and misinformation. We need to base our opinions and decisions on evidence and keep the environment, social and economic benefits on the agenda. We need to get alternative voices out there, which is why I'm speaking here tonight. Every time a wind farm is built, the technology used improves and the amount of power being produced increases and the cost of electricity production goes down. How do we reduce our reliance on fossil fuels? By pricing them out of the market and committing ourselves to a transition strategy to clean energy. But to do that, we need to allow renewables in there to compete, rather than blocking them from even getting off the ground. We need a solid commitment to clean energy from the government and the bar lifted by wind industry on sharing the profits more widely. In short, we need farmer-friendly and community-friendly wind farms. But it's not just all about wind. We need to have good diversity in our renewable energy sources. We need solar, we need geothermal, we need tidal power, wave power, solar thermal, and other technologies that are still to be developed. We also need to embrace the energy storage revolution that is knocking at our door. We already have a mammoth task trying to limit global warming to 2 degrees. Let's not create any extra hurdles on the path to reining in the climate, and let us all, including our children and our grandchildren, reap the benefits. Thank you.
Hi folks, I'm Peter Fraser and I'm from the Goulburn Group and I'm the chairperson of Community Energy for Goulburn. Nick got it wrong, he called it Clean Energy for Goulburn and he's wrong, he didn't read his sheet properly. You're usually wrong, he says. It's Community Energy for Goulburn. So what we've heard today is we've heard Urs get up and talk about the world scene and that Australia's not looking real good. Jeremy's got up and as a good politician will do, bag out the other politician. And then Prue's got up and said, hey, wait a minute, that's not exactly right. So we've had the politicians have a go, and then Demity's got up and said, actually, I live really near a wind farm and it's not too big a problem. But one of the things that she talked about is community consultation and the need for talking to the community. One of the things that Urs talked about is the need for us to maybe think, oh, these politicians aren't really delivering. So how else can we do something if we're just not getting through to politicians? They're just not really coming up with the goods. And it seems to me that's one of the big problems that we as communities have, that there's a lot of argument that goes on with politicians, but when it comes to coming up with the goods, it's a problem for us, and we feel that it's a problem for us. So while the Community Energy for Goulburn project is not going to save Australia, it's not going to save the world, it ain't going to solve Goulburn's problems with energy, it's an attempt by some people in the community to try and do something. And I'm not sure whether it will work, I'm not quite sure whether we're going to save Goulburn or save New South Wales or save the world, but I certainly think community energy is a new development that's happening in Australia, which has been powering ahead in Europe and the United States. So in those places, they're actually getting on with it. In Denmark, 40% of all renewable energy is owned by community groups, just like Goulburn, 40%. Not great big huge wind farms, not great big huge solar farms, but basically reasonably small, able to be financed by the community, and that's how the community is getting involved in energy. So just quickly, what is community energy? And the way I've described it is really simple. It's sustainable energy production or distribution that is owned by the community. And there are many ways to do this. But here in Goulburn, CE4G is just investigating one particular style or type of community energy. So what is CE4G? The Goulburn Group was approached by Divals, a decent-sized company in Goulburn, to partner with them in applying for a grant from the Office of Environment and Heritage to do a feasibility study into building a solar farm. And I have to say publicly thank you to Prue for helping us get that grant, because she put in a submission with a whole lot of other people and she helped us to get that grant. So the grant was for $50,000, and when we got it, the Goulburn Group then set up a committee called Community Energy for Goulburn to do the feasibility study, but the feasibility study not on general ideas but on one specific idea. We partnered with some other stakeholders. Infigen Energy is one of them. The Solar Council is another. Solar Share is another. Goulburn Mulwaree Council is another. We partnered with those people in setting up the committee and doing the technical work to investigate whether this is possible. We got the money April of last year. So we've been working with a committee for 10 months now. The project is looking at building a 1 to 1.5 megawatt solar farm on an already identified site on the edge of Goulburn. And there's a couple of maps up the back you can have a look at if you don't know about it after we've finished here. We have to put the feasibility study in at the end of April, so we've got 2 more months to finish it. Just a few details about the project. It will have approximately 4,000 solar panels, maybe a few more, depending on if they're really efficient, we might be able to get a few less. They're fixed solar panels, not tilting ones, so they're not going to follow the sun or anything like that. They're fixed. It's about 2 hectares, maybe 2.5 hectares in size, the site. It's located on old, disused industrial land, so it's perfect for this kind of application. And it has the potential to supply up to 1,000 homes with electricity, somewhere between 700 and 1,000 homes with electricity. Eventually, CE4G will be hived off from the Goulburn Group, and it will set up its own business entity, and that business entity will run this particular project, which is the solar farm over there, if it's deemed to be feasible. CE4G may also look at future projects in sustainable energy, depending on how much resources we've got and how we're going with our first project. And CE4G will be looking for investors, people with money, because that's how we're going to do this, because we're a community. I just want to say a few things of where we're up to, just for those people who, quite a few of you here have already taken some interest in the project, but I'll just say a few things of where we're going. The first thing we wanted to look at is community acceptance. Is this the sort of thing this community wants? And is there going to be any large-scale opposition to it? And from that, we've learned a little bit from some of the experiences of the wind farms, where the early wind farm developers weren't all that keen to talk to the community. So what we've done is, the first thing we did is we door-knocked all the people in the neighbourhood of this land and spoke to them and said, what do you think about this idea? And we had an overwhelming positive response, no negative responses at all. Then we've held a couple of public meetings. The first public meeting, we had about 120 people come along to it. Not one negative comment of any substance. A few questions, oh, how's this going to work, that kind of stuff. But again, an overwhelming positive response from the community. And at the time, we just said, okay, what kind of money could you cough up if it went ahead? And at that one meeting, with 120 people, we got over $200,000 sort of pledged in an informal manner. So that was a pretty encouraging start from the community to say that we could cough up that kind of money. Since then, we've had at least another 100,000 of informal pledges to the project. So from a community point of view, we're doing well. On the technical side, there's been some issues that none of us on the committee knew a lot about, so we had to contract that out. And we've been using Infigen Energy, who've been helping us. We've been using the Solar Council, who've been helping us, and we've been using a company in Canberra who've been helping us. At the moment, we've got a solar testing device down on the land where they're looking at how much solar radiation that land actually gets, because Goulburn doesn't have a record that's reliable enough about how much solar radiation's coming into this area. There's one in Canberra, but none in Goulburn. We've also spoken to a number of energy retailers who are looking to possibly partner with us in order to sell electricity to people in Goulburn. And we've partnered with, we've been talking to 2 or 3 of those, and we've had some really strong and encouraging noises from them saying that they would be interested in partnering with us. We've also had an incredibly encouraging response from one large energy user in Goulburn, who, if we wanted to use them, it's an institution, they would use everything that we can produce. They'd use the whole 1 megawatt just like that and still want more. So we've got to the stage technically where we've got a number of avenues for selling our power. And the great thing about it is we'll make dollars out of it, which is the most important thing. We've also looked at governance models. So we've looked at how would we set up some kind of entity that would run this show. And we looked at about 6 or 7, and we've come down to a choice of 2. One is a co-op, and one is a public unlisted company. And they're the 2 choices that we're looking at the moment as to the kind of entity through which we would govern this operation. We've looked at finance modelling, and we've had a company looking at that, and they're actually come up with some predictions which are incredibly healthy. So they're talking about a rate of return on investment of somewhere between 5 and 8%. Now, for people who've got money in the bank, you're getting 2%. So a return on investment of somewhere between 5 and 8% looks very, very good. And they're very confident that they can produce a model, and we can produce a solar farm that will produce that kind of return on investment. In terms of the site, we've had a few problems with the site. After we started doing the DA, we realised that about a third of it is under the 100-year flood zone. So we've had to move some of our panels to a higher ground to make sure that we don't get hit with an extra insurance premium because it's below this 100-year flood zone. Finally, potential investors. If this project is deemed to be feasible, and we'll know within about a month, then we're going to go through the process of saying, where do we go next? The next stage is to set up an entity which will then come to the public and say, how about you invest in this project? We'll have all the financials. We'll be able to present you with some sort of return on investment predictions, and we'll say, okay, are you ready to go, and are you ready as a community to buy into this kind of project? And hopefully we'll get the solar farm up and running, and we may then be able to move on to a second and a third project, because our community is already starting to identify further things that we can do as a community in renewable energy. So eventually we want to hit you for some dollars, and I think it's a great place to invest. This will be a terrific place to invest if we get going. So that's all I'm going to say. If you want more information on our fantastic feasibility study, there's a little brochure up the back. There's some little maps up the back that'll show you where the site is. And if you want to get more information, if you're not already on our mailing list, you just go to our website, you register. We will send you more information as it comes through. We send out newsletters. You'll get a copy of the feasibility study when we've completed it in about 6 to 8 weeks, and we'll continue to keep you up to date with any further developments as we go. So please, if you're not on our mailing list, go and register on our website. The website is ce4g.org.au. Got it? C for community. Thanks.
Thank you, speakers. I will just point out there are a whole lot of pamphlets and leaflets down the back there, so if anyone wants to grab them later on before they leave, they've probably got a lot of good reading material in them. I'd also like to apologise on behalf of my boy the sun. Great for clean energy. Great for clean energy, not so great for sitting behind the panel that you're trying to keep an eye on. So apologies to everyone who got blasted up the middle there. We're going to move on to the question and answer section. I'd just remind everyone to keep it as respectful as possible, and also to keep it as concise as possible, because I know a lot of people probably have a lot of things they want to talk about or ask. I know our friend down the front here wanted to speak first, so I'll move along to you first, sir.
G'day, my name is Roland Gumpert. Some of you know me. I'm a Green. I've been Green for the last 10 years. Used to vote Labor, no longer. I've never voted Liberal in my life, but Prue is a friend, and partly because I represented the Gullen Range wind farm opposition, and in the course of doing that I had to come and talk to Prue, and she spent a very large amount of time, asked incredibly intelligent questions, and worked incredibly hard to digest everything. Now, before I became involved in this wind farm development, I was absolutely 100% in favour of wind farms in theory and in practice. Following inquiries, discussions with affected people, I can say that just about everyone who has a wind farm close to where they live doesn't want it there. I said just about everyone. I don't know, there's some people who are in favour of it, but most people were against it. And one of the reasons they were against it, and the simplest reason to understand, is statistically in Victoria, where they've got figures, there's a 30% loss in value of your property if you have a wind farm near it. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, as has been pointed out, there are some very, very untested and unknown health considerations. So there's two things there. So it goes on. The bushfire people will not fly a plane near wind turbines. So if you've got a fire...
Yeah. If you could come to the question, please.
I'm just putting into perspective because there was some misinformation.
Mate, I'm going to have to cut you off there.
Do you want information or
Mate,
do
I'm
you
sorry,
want
I'm going to have to cut you.
I'm sorry?
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut you off there because you didn't come to the question. As I said, keep it respectful, keep it concise. I'm going to hand over to Mark.
Well, I'll make up for that and ask a couple of questions. So, you talked about wind turbines there and health, and I think Prue's right in being concerned about those things and asking about for science and that. But I don't believe our government's interested in science at all, from what I've seen. I'd ask for where's the studies on the effects of CSG. I mean, I've just come back from the Pilliga, and there's a whole lot of people complaining there about the effects of CSG on their health, their water, their aquifers, and all of those things. I don't see any inquiry into that. I understand that the Wind Turbine Commissioner on Health we had David Wainholm putting in for that, and I understand that he voted to have native forest logged as biomass federally as a renewable and given credits. And the deal for that was that there'd be a Wind Turbine Commissioner on Health who was then appointed. Well, I think we know the health effects of coal. So if we're talking about science, let's talk about the health effects of coal. Let's talk about the health effects of CSG. I've just been up there. I mean, I won't say what side of the fence I was, but crawling around in the forest, and I've got a nasty infection in my leg. And all the people I've spoken to are all the same. So if it's health effects, there's a question. If it's about science, there's a question. We know the health effects of our air, of coal. We know all of these things. So we've got to balance that out. I'm all for science for all of them, but nobody's talking about the other health effects. Jeremy talked about, he couldn't talk about the environment. Well, I will. I'll be up the Laird Forest in about 2 weeks, and that's a whopping great coal mine that was going to be one of the biggest ones in Australia. I don't see that being stopped. Sorry? The question was health effects. Why, if we're about science, why isn't there a commission into CSG? And we know the effects of coal. So why are we worried about these effects as well? Nobody's talking about that. Yep. And for the environment, why are we destroying the Laird Forest? If it's about science, that was said to be an irreplaceable forest with 30 threatened species. It's a state forest, it's our forest. So why are we destroying that?
Who's the question addressed to?
Our politicians there. I only ever speak to politicians.
What's interesting is you've got to look at other jurisdictions. I base my decisions based on science, reason and the evidence. The NHMRC came back and said there was no evidence of any adverse health impact from wind farms. That's what they said. They said that there needs to be more research, but they said there was no evidence, none. There was no... Excuse me, Prue. That's what they said. I'm saying that's what they said. And I've been to Victoria. I went to the largest wind farm in the southern hemisphere, the MacArthur Wind Farm, last week. And I asked the farmers there, were there any complaints from the neighbours about health? And they said no. Now it was about the fact that there was a visual amenity and the fact that the farmers nearby weren't getting the money. There was a drought down there. The farmers were upset that they weren't getting the money from the wind turbines. This debate is not occurring in Denmark, in Scotland, in the United States. This debate, it doesn't happen. We are a laughingstock internationally because politicians like Prue give this debate credence. We are 10 years behind other countries in investment in renewable energy, and it's not just that politicians are listening to those concerns, they are parroting those concerns in the media and in Parliament, and it's affecting our capacity to actually develop this industry. no evidence, and it's a massive mistake when, as you've said the incredible the data about the impact, the $300 million a year cost of coal dust on the people of the Hunter Valley, and this government won't do a comprehensive health study on it. Cancer clusters, people with high rates of asthma, black lung, bronchitis. They will not properly do a study or even monitor PM 2.5, the most dangerous particulate pollution in the Hunter, because they know if they did, they'd realise that they are killing people in the Hunter Valley. So on one side of the coin, it's okay to like they ignore the evidence and people die, and here they're parroting pseudoscience with absolutely no evidence whatsoever. And in terms of the RFS, that's just not true. They will fight fires around them all the time. They do it in Victoria, they do it here.
I've read something like 20,000 pages of literature on this. So, hyperbole is not a substitute for reason.
What's the document?
Now, I'm in favour practically of renewable energies and just about any renewable energy. But I say that if you're going to put in renewable energy, then you should be in a position as well to compensate people who are going to be adversely affected by it financially or otherwise. Just to come along and say, oh, motherhood statement, we love renewable energy. Yes, I love the renewable energy as a motherhood statement, but I don't want it in my backyard because I won't be able to sell my house.
I'm very happy for
because in the absence of overwhelming evidence, but still with enough community concern and some evidence, the government decided that that is the position it would take. It would have a blanket ban. Not great for business, but it's what they did. And as you know, up in the Pilliga and the other proposals, I think there's only one left. AGL is pulled out, and we're just talking about Santos. But the process is exhausting, and the health department, I don't think anybody here is going to suggest that health officials are corrupt. I can tell you it goes nowhere near the cabinet. So it's not as if we go through the submissions that are about to be made by the health department and say, no, it doesn't agree with our friends and donors. No, please. So, of course, we don't do that. We rely on the evidence of experts, and it is properly allowed to be assessed by the Planning Assessment Commission.
It's just that when we talk about anecdotal evidence, there's probably 10 times more anecdotal evidence about the effects of CSG. And I appreciate the government closing those CSG licences, although they may still be active for a while.
No, the licences are gradually, and they cost a fortune. Thank you, Labor government, for leaving us with a bill, but we're withdrawing them, yes.
Having a Santos in the Pilliga or the Laird Forest for coal mining or Breezer for coal mining of Shenmue. It's all very well to say, we'll put them out of sight, out of mind of city people. It destroys the environment and the aquifer. It's okay to say the community isn't going to be affected there, so we'll take them away from Camden, we'll take them away from Sydney water catchment. But they're just being put further out in remote communities where there's the effects on the environment. And I actually asked parliamentary friends at Landcare, at a Landcare conference last year, they did a laugh about that. They asked, well, today, Upper Rookie Landcare is taking the government to court over the Breezer and Liverpool Plains over coal mining. So if they're friends of Landcare, what is being done about that? We know the effects of coal, but it's out of sight, it's not out of mind. It's still the aquifer. There's still millions of litres taken away from farmers, and the wildlife are dying in their thousands. And I know, because I've been in both places, and why I'm going to be in the land in 2 weeks. I'll be arrested, stopping the clearing there. Why should I have to do that?
Well,
the government is the person that should be protecting us.
Yes, and I think the process is getting better all the time, and it's the scientific evidence is getting better, and we're get better at collecting the data, and we're getting better at collecting information about health effects. Science is getting better, and that's what you need. Unlike other people, governments are tested very, very closely on their respect for factual information.
And just
But may I say, when it comes to Shenhua, for example,
we're not divulging into it.
As I understand it, one of the conditions of the Planning Assessment Commission for approval of that particular mine is that every litre of water that's extracted has to be returned.
I think Jeremy wants to jump in and say something there.
That is absolute rubbish. All of that, I'm sorry, but Prue Goward was the person who signed the approval for Shenhua. Prue... the Sydney Morning Herald...
It was the Planning Assessment Commission.
No. The Planning Assessment Commission made a recommendation to you, and you said it would be an economic boom. And the Department of Health in all those coal mines said, raised their concerns, and in the Warkworth coal mine, in those major expansions, in the CSG, their submission was it should not go ahead. So the Department of Health saying, we've got concerns, it should not go ahead. And then it gets the tick of approval. In the wind farm issue, Department of Health here saying no problem, and yet you get the opposition. That is just not consistent. And in terms of the 2.5 metre exclusion zone, the exclusion zone that Barry O'Farrell brought in, that wasn't brought in out of science. I wanted that exclusion zone. I fought for that, for a ban on that, but that wasn't brought in out of science. That was brought out of pure political pressure, because there was a whole nervous Nelly coalition MPs in the Wallandilly area who said, oh my God, we're going to lose our seats, ban it. Quite rightly, I said to AGL and Santos, and there was no legitimate scientific reason given for the 2.5 kilometre exclusion zone. So again and again and again, we've seen approvals. The planning assessment, the independent expert scientific committee that assessed Shenhua, the biggest coal mine in the middle of our food bowl, that Prue Goward signed off and approved, said it should not go ahead. It met none of its criteria. The independent expert scientific committee, it failed 12 out of 12, and yet it was approved.
And the day that a minister in a responsible government rejects the advice of an independent authority that has the capacity and the time to collect the expert and community evidence and to assess those effects, and the day a minister overturns that and starts making their own decisions, Jeremy, is the day we go back to the bad old days of corruption where ministers do things because somebody's paid them to do it. No, like your friends, thank you.
How many Liberal MPs lost their seat the last...
And you know very well there is absolutely no evidence that anybody took money from Shenhua.
I think we'll move along.
For goodness sake. Come on, Jeremy.
Now.
You're supposed to be a Green, not a Labor stooge.
Don't be like this. Come on. All right, I think we'll move along to a different question now. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to ask maybe about community energy for Goulburn? Or...
I'll bring this back.
Prue Goward MP has to leave the room. Unfortunately, she has Parliament tomorrow. So thank you, Prue, for your time.
Thanks, Prue.
Back to you, Scotty. I hope your question wasn't for Prue.
Yeah, no, it's all right. Look, it's all about, we've had a lot about the how to make the energy. We haven't heard a lot about, like saving energy. You see the old people get around on electronic scooters or whatever. How do we reimagine the urban environment? Like, we're in a building that was built in the 70s that has flow-through ventilation, but we live in like a suburb where people might have to walk 4 k's in the heat of the day just to get to the shops. People at Bradfordville, all the social housing out there, they've got to travel in town. So it's more about reimagining the local urban environment. Everyone.
Peter has actually decided he has something to say.
Well, we've started looking at that a little bit in community energy for Goulburn, and we've started talking about a second and a third project. So we've started looking at different kinds of things that we might be able to do in Goulburn that would help some of those sorts of issues. Not all of them, but it's certainly an issue about how houses are designed, how renewable energies affects the efficiency of a house, and whether we can help with that in the community. And we've started just looking at a few ideas that we may be able to develop in the future, specifically for this this community, but also it may help other communities as well.
I'd like to talk about policy, and I think it's really important. You may remember the carbon price, the carbon tax. That carbon price, which was brought in through an agreement with the Greens and Labor, was, I think, a fantastic policy and where politics worked. We went to Labor, said we need a carbon price. That came in. It caused a massive drop in greenhouse gas emissions, and what it did, it generated revenue from our 100 biggest polluters, and it put it into the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. That fund is how some of these big projects around the country have actually been built. It's a fund that could fund your community project, and just today it announced that it was going to put $250 million into energy efficiency programs across the country, looking at big universities, looking at big users of electricity and public housing as well. So that was a public policy initiative, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, that developed money, that put it into energy efficiency, put it into major projects, and Prue, unfortunately she's had to go, but her party wants to kill. On the minister announced the $250 million of funding for an organisation they want to abolish. They abolished the carbon price, even though it was working, generating the money, driving a price signal, driving it down. It funded some of these big wind projects, was looking at energy efficiency, and yet they wanted to kill off the bank that was actually funding all of these amazing, providing the finance and actually generating a profit. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation is actually generating a profit. So it was it is a fantastic organisation. The Liberal Coalition want to abolish it because they're ideologically opposed to renewable energy. They don't believe in climate change.
Any other questions from the crowd?
Thank you. I'd like to know, most of the discussions tonight has been for Goulburn. I'd like to know what is in the pipeline for small villages around outside Goulburn. I come from Bungonia. We have solar panels on our hall, and a lot of the houses in the village have their own solar panels. And a lot of the people who live there would actually like to go off the grid, have a wind turbine, have solar accessible to help with the energy commitments of its people. But not much is said about small communities and what can be done to help them.
Well, look, the community energy for Goulburn, it revolves a little bit around what the word community means, and we've struggled with how you define community. Do you define it geographically, or do you define it demographically, or do you define it in two ways? And our definition to start off with is that what we are looking at is the Goulburn-Mulwari community, and if that's not a big enough community to sustain our project, we would then look at joining in with perhaps the Southern Highlands or the Southern Tablelands, and we'd increase the size of the community. And it also depends, so the community would have the option of investing in our project, and then the next issue would be what are we going to do with the electricity that we generate? Where does it go? And we've got a number of different options. And one of them is just to sell to one great big huge consumer. That would still generate a return on investment for anybody in the community who wants to invest in the project. And we're going to have a minimum of $500 to invest, so that you'll be able to buy a share for $500, and that will give you as much voting power as someone who invests $100,000. But then, if we decide to, instead of selling our energy to one big consumer, we may go down the retail route, and we will sell our energy to a retailer on condition that they then resell that electricity to the community at a reduced price from what they're paying at the moment. So it doesn't mean that we can help you go off grid, but it may help people in Goulburn with their electricity bills. And they can also feel that they are part of this community because they own something that's generating electricity for themselves. We don't have all the answers, and this is one project, but we know now that in the United States, whole towns cut the wires and go completely off grid and generate their own electricity and sell it to the people in their own town. And there are towns in the United States doing that where they've gone off grid. The whole town has gone off grid. I visited a town in Germany last year where the town was generating 5 times as much electricity as it used. It was a town about the same size as Crookwell. So it was generating a huge amount of power through solar panels, through wind and through a biogenerator. It had all three. And it was selling its excess to the grid, and the whole town was making money out of what they were doing because they could flog it off to the grid and other people would be buying it. So there are millions, not millions, there's heaps of different models for community energy. There's a company in the north coast of New South Wales called Enova. They have just launched themselves onto the market. They are just a retailer. They don't make electricity, they just buy it and sell it. It's a community energy project. The whole company is owned by the community, and they raised $3 million to start that company off. And the people in the community benefit from the retail price because they get a better price. The company Enova does a deal with the suppliers and buys only green energy and still sells it at a cheap price than what people can pay for at the moment. Because in general terms, in really rough terms, a solar farm can make electricity for about 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and you will be paying about 30 cents right at the moment. So there's a huge gap between what it costs to make the stuff and what everybody's paying for it. And at the moment, most of those dollars are going into the pockets of network owners and retail owners. That's where it's all going, in their margins. So if the community can get on board with this kind of stuff, not only can the community pay less for their energy, they can own the electricity and they can do it sustainably. So there's some big pluses with community energy in general.
When I was on Orange City Council, I did 2 terms on Orange City Council. I did 8 years, and you get less for murder. But I did 2 terms on Orange City Council, and in 2004, when I was first elected, what I said to my council was, let's spend $50,000 a year on solar panels to help a little bit in terms of our impact on climate change and show some political leadership. A lot of the more conservative councillors argued very strongly against it, said it was a waste of money, the payback time was 15 years, 20 years' time, all the rest of it. I said, well, there's a pretty generous tariff on it. And what happened was Orange City Council put the first, I got the proposal up, they put the first $50,000 on, paid for themselves in 3 years, and they just went berserk putting solar panels on all the major users of electricity around the town. So they put them on the preschool, the library, and they're still making hundreds of thousands of dollars because of that tariff. But what the point of this is that your council and the ROC organisations, those regional organisations of council, have massive purchasing power and they have money in the bank. Despite this Fit for the Future talk about how all the councils are broke, most of them are sitting on significant amounts of money. There's money in those funds, sewer development, developer contributions, that they can leverage to put in regional scale, solar, wind, community-based partnering in community projects to actually reduce their electricity costs, because council's electricity costs to pump water, because your local council pumps water, it runs the sewer, runs all these utilities, are absolutely enormous. Part of your rates bill, a significant part of your rates bill, is electricity costs. And so those regional organisations and councils should actually be saying, look, to these wind farm developers, we'll have 3 of those turbines as well, or we will partner with you. And councils are doing it. The councils in Western New South Wales are looking at the Nyngan Solar Power Station. It's 2 kilometres by 2 kilometres. It's generating enough electricity to run 2 towns the size of Dubbo. Took a year to build, and everybody loves it. And the future should be that regional scale, and councils should take the lead in developing those models of renewable energy.
Just one word to the lady from Bungonia. This, what you hear here, at least even to me, it sounds daunting sometimes. It's like really big. All these terms here, the issues that are raised, it sounds extremely complex. Peter has described how Community Energy for Goulburn has developed and is now really a very, very big project. It started with one little step. I can only suggest to you to start that step, to make that first step in Bungonia, sit together with people who think along similar lines and start building something up. It does work. It actually does work. It will lead you somewhere. And we have seen it with the Goulburn Group. It started exactly like that. People who thought, what can we do? Can we do something? There's always these politicians, they talk so much. Sorry, Jeremy. But what are they doing for us here in our little town? And that's how we started. Today, the Goulburn Group is rather successful, as you can see, not least from Peter's project. So a town like Bungonia can easily, not easily, no, wrong, can eventually be independent. If you find enough people and you start working on this goal, you can become independent and you can become one of these little towns, like Peter described. There's actually several in Germany, who become power producers. Everyone on their roof, or they have a little solar farm, or they even have wind turbines, and you become a power producer and you sell it back to the grid. It's possible. I can only encourage you to make that first step. You will be surprised how many people suddenly want to walk with you.
I wanted to ask if thoughts have been given to solar cracking water for hydrogen and then manufacturing hydrogen for the use in cars and whatnot, where the exhaust will just be water. All you're taking is the solar energy out of the water.
Is that a question of science that someone has the ability to answer? Someone want to guess?
The leader of the Australian group was in Canberra yesterday, showcasing a hydrogen fuel cell car, and we fully support Greens, absolutely support. We believe that the luxury car taxes that apply to some of the high-end electrical cars should come down, and that some of the costs associated with registering alternative fuel, electricity cars should come down. There should be incentives to drive and change towards electric cars, recognising their beneficial impact on our environment.
I was thinking large-scale solar, producing large quantities of hydrogen for
I think there might be some science behind it.
Yeah, Alex. Or we got two more.
Were you going to talk?
Probably someone better qualified than I, but I've looked into it. Yeah, the problem is the thermodynamics of it all. Fuel cells are highly efficient, but at the moment there's a lot of work still needing to be done to make them last a long time. The problem there is the catalyst, and they only just learned how to replace platinum with the iron cobalt oxide catalysts. But these get poisoned very rapidly. So although the actual efficiency of transferring the oxygen and hydrogen into electricity is sort of 99%, the long-term costs are still very high. But the big problem is the debit that you get when you try and make the hydrogen. You crack water into hydrogen and oxygen, and you don't use the oxygen. Well, you should use the oxygen. You can use it for medicine or something like that. But you'll rapidly get a gross amount. It's like liquid nitrogen. When you extract air and make liquid oxygen, liquid nitrogen is virtually free because it's a cheap byproduct. But the loss in entropy in actually making the hydrogen is huge. The whole cycle is very inefficient. We've been through the hydrogen cycle when we used to have town gas already, and it's a thing of the past.
I can add one more thing to that. Yes, the process of turning water, or splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen is reasonably inefficient. That's something that might improve in the future. But the temptation to increase fracking, so one way to create hydrogen is you take methane and you lop off a carbon molecule, and then you end up with hydrogen. So hydrogen can be, when it starts to scale up, a magnifying force for the use of fossil fuels. And that's a little bit scary. When you start doing the maths of how much hydrogen you'll actually need and how you'll produce it, it can get out of hand quite quickly. But other than that, hydrogen's great.
Thank you. I'd just to, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but I got here late. Go, Peter, thank you. Mick Butts here. I'm one of the people in Goulburn that's put on solar panels on their roof. One, to be altruistic to the community and save, fossil fuel use, but also to try and cut my fuel bill, my energy bills down. Now, some days I use all the electricity that I produce, and a lot of days I don't. At the moment, I'm being paid a paltry amount of cents for this excess production. I'm sure there's lots and lots of other people in Goulburn that are doing exactly the same thing because we're tied up to one of the big companies that sort of set the price. I would like the freedom, if your CE4G gets going as a proper company and producing, for you to become a supplier generally, and for you to be able to tender for my electricity. Is that a possibility? To offer a price, like it's local produced, there's existing wires and things, which all the other companies seem to be able to use willy-nilly, like my last supplier was from Melbourne. And before that, I think it was a Sydney company, and now it's Origin. But none of them are offering me the proper amount of money that I feel they should be giving me, because I know they're selling it on as green energy for something like, I think it's about 34 cents a kilowatt hour now, and I'm getting 6 cents. There's a big difference.
Yeah, it's a bit of a rip-off, really. In fact, those people from Melbourne and all over the place, they're actually just retailers that are buying off you. The national energy market's quite complex because it consists of, and they're the ones you think you're dealing with, but they're just buying electricity off the network owner who's buying it off Transgrid, who's buying it off the generator. So there are all these little steps along the way that make it, they all take a cut, and the retailer takes the biggest cut because they're the ones that have to spend all the money sending out bills and chasing people that don't pay their bills and that kind of stuff. It'd be a great idea, and it's worth thinking through whether that could be possible. But it would have to be done thoroughly, and there's been a whole lot of new legislation that's come into existence in the last 6 months that's trying to look at this whole issue of community energy because it's so new in Australia. It's very well developed overseas, but it's really very, very new in Australia. It's really only been going for about 1.5 to 2 years, apart from one wind farm in Victoria called Hepburn Wind Farm, and they've only been generating for about 5 years. But I think things will change over the next 12 to 18 months. One of the big changes is all those people that bought panels and got 60 cents instead of 6 cents. That's all finished at the end of this year or beginning of next year, and there's over 100,000 of those people in New South Wales. They're all going to be hunting around for what are they going to do with electricity, and they won't want to sell it for 6 cents when they used to get 60 cents for it. So one of the issues will be battery technology and how battery technology starts to move into the market, because at some point battery technology is going to enable you to buy your electricity at night time when it's cheap off the grid, top up your batteries, and it'll allow you to top up your batteries during the day when you're generating power, and then you'll be able to use that power from the battery, so you won't be using power off the grid when it's expensive. When it's 34 cents, you'll be able to buy it at a lot cheaper rate. So there's going to be a lot of changes that happen over the next couple of years that'll make things quite different for everybody in terms of their purchase of electricity and whether they can in fact go completely off the grid. And I suspect there's going to be a whack of people that just decide they're going to cut the wires. They'll buy batteries when it's viable enough to. They'll put a few more panels on their roof, and they might just buy a little cheap electric generator, a petrol generator for when it gets cloudy for more than 3 or 4 days, just to top up their batteries. So that's a possibility. When that happens, the electricity generators, the network owners, the retailers, Transgrid, they're all going to be up the creek because demand is going to keep dropping. And they'll go into this thing called the death spiral, where less and less people buying electricity of them. They've got to cover the costs of their wires and their infrastructure, so they'll keep jacking the price up higher and higher. More and more people will say, well, stuff that, I'm going to go off the grid myself. So more and more people will go off the grid, and there'll end up being this spiral where less and less people are going to be on the grid because batteries are going to get cheaper and cheaper, and you'll be able to do it yourself. You'll just go off grid, and I think that's a real scenario that a lot of these guys are looking at. That's why the state government just flogged off a lot of their poles and wires, because they know they're not going to be worth too much money in another 3 or 4 years. So I can't help you right now, but I think things will change. Yeah. And also, look, we were speaking to a community energy group from the South Coast that are addressing that very issue, because what they're doing is they're looking at how to help disadvantaged people with solar panels, particularly people that rent. So they're coming up with a scheme, which is a community energy finance scheme, to help disadvantaged people get into solar and renewables in general. So there are actually community groups even addressing that. So it's a possibility.
It's not so much. Right. This
this is not so much a question, really. At the beginning of this meeting, you paid a tribute to the Aboriginal custodians of this the traditional custodians of this land. And I feel that in all the debate about energy, there's one thing that's missing, and that is a sense of our Western society being in any way a custodian of the land. So I'm dead against, for instance, coal seam gas extraction, because what hasn't been mentioned is that to get this gas out, you actually have to pump a toxic mix of chemicals into the ground, and a very toxic mix comes out. And then this toxic mix lays around the place. It might be in a tailings dam, but nobody can guarantee the integrity of a tailings dam indefinitely. One day it's going to be back on the land, distributed in the waterways, anywhere you like. Just yesterday in the news, they're talking about methane bubbling up madly in the Condamine River in Queensland. That's poison. and it's not going to go back. Once it's done, it's done. I grew up in the Hunter Valley. I do remember it as a much nicer place than it is now. Once you've torn the heart out of those hills, out of that agricultural land, it's gone. It's absolutely gone. So I don't really care a damn about how many turbines there are on the horizon, or how many solar panels there are distributed around the ground, because they're temporary things. They can be all torn down. They will be torn down. Technology one day will catch up with us, and they'll be smaller, they'll be neater, they'll be more efficient, and those things are replaceable. But the actual land is not. Therefore, I would hold all political parties responsible. Put that right up at the front of their manifestos. I am responsible as a custodian of the land.
I'd like to see a show of hands. Who here has a grandmother? A grandmother.
We're too old.
Who here would like to see their grandmother dug out of the ground from her burial place for a coal mine? Now, can you imagine that just this month, the Gomeroi people, who have living people, the Gomeroi in northwest New South Wales, living people who knew their grandmother, they know where she was buried, and grandfathers, they know where they were buried in the lead forest. They'd been buried in the lead forest for 25,000 years plus. So before they built the pyramids, they were burying people in that country, and Prue Goward's government, Prue Goward herself, approved the desecration and destruction of their graves. They weren't removed, they were just told they're an artefact and they can be destroyed. And a bulldozer went in, cleared the scrub, took the topsoil off, then they drilled down through their graves and blew them sky high. Imagine the outrage if we did that in your old cemetery down here.
Awesome point. Yeah, hands up if you're Catholic. Yeah, it's yours. I actually have a question if no one objects to me asking it. I know I'm the facilitator. It's just around the structure of your the entity that you're going to be setting up as Clean Energy for Goulburn. So someone like me who's, relatively new to the workforce, finished their degree, lower level of the company, not getting paid as much, renting, trying to pay bills, that sort of thing, would love to invest in this sort of thing, doesn't really have the cash to do it. Someone with a bit more money comes in and invests in that and gets that community project up and running, and it is a community entity for all intents and purposes to start with. Down the track, when I want to invest in that, is there a risk that it's going to be CE4G Limited that I'm then going to have to buy shares in, and some Scrooge up in his McMansion up on the hill is going to own the majority of shares in, or is there going to be a mechanism to prevent that from happening?
Yes, that's all I can say. We haven't worked out all the mechanisms, but we've been looking at how we put restrictions on the shares that people are able to own. So the first thing we decided is each share is going to be worth $500. So that's a fairly low price. So that would allow that would allow a large number of people to get into it. And and they will have as much. They will have one vote. $500 will give them one vote. Another punter who comes along with $100,000, he can also invest in the project, and he will get 100,000 shares and one vote, not 100,000 votes. He will only get one vote, or she. So one of the things we've worked very strongly on is how do we protect people who are not very wealthy, and how do we give them a say in how this is run, and how do we stop the thing being overrun by someone with heaps of money? That's one issue. Another one is it's got to be 51% community owned. So we can't have some big company coming in and buying up a whole bunch of shares that ends up dominating the whole thing. So there will always have to be 51% community owned structure on it. And then we've looked at how long, like one of the issues that someone raised, and it's a fair enough issue, I want to buy some shares, but when I'm getting old and about to croak, I want to hand them on to my children, right? So, and they don't live in Goulburn. They live up the north coast or somewhere like that, you know? So how do we structure the whole thing so that someone who's wanting to give their shares to someone else who doesn't live in the community, how do we do that? And also, you know, if there's quite a few people have come to us and said, look, I've got my own self-managed super fund and I want to put some money into it, right? I might want to put 10 grand into it or something like that because, you know, 5% is pretty good return. It's better than the super funds get. But somewhere along the line, I want to cash that in, you know. How long do I have to invest in before I can cash those shares in? So we're looking at a mechanism by which we put some restrictions on it because we don't want people to sell off their shares too quickly to outsiders, so we have to have a mechanism by which we do that. We haven't come up with all of the answers to every one of those questions, but they're questions that have been posed that we're looking at. And don't forget, all we're doing is a feasibility study. So we're looking at the feasibility of doing this, and whoever it is that takes this on, and it'll be a community group, but it'll be under some sort of structure, they will have to have those sorts of questions answered in their prospectus. So they will go out beforehand.
That's awesome. It sounds like you've got all your bases covered, so thank you for that. Yep.
I've got a question of a sort of technical nature, I guess. I take your point and I agree with it that we're the laughing stock of the world on renewable energies generally. I think we're a disgrace. But the fact that we're late adopters, do we get any advantages from that with the improvements of technology, and does that help us catch up eventually if we should ever get a government that is prepared to pull its finger out?
Behind, doesn't it?
Well, one, we've missed the boat on, well, to some extent, yes. Yeah, if we actually get around to doing the adopting bit, yeah, no problem. We'll have, we might as well let's just wait forever. and like just until the technology is perfect. If you apply that logic, the big area I think that where we've already missed the boat is the opportunity to implement the PV research that was developed at the University of New South Wales into a domestic manufacturing industry. Our car industry's dead, our textile industry's dead with tariffs, all of those things. We've seen a massive loss of manufacturing. That sector is in decline, and we missed the opportunity to develop a world-class PV industry and the manufacturer of it here. The same with wind turbines. We've missed the opportunity. We didn't get behind our initially get behind renewables so that helped nurture that side of the industry like other countries did, and now we've just been absolutely knocked out of the way by Denmark and China, of course. Absolutely, the technology is getting better and better and better. I was talking to AGL about the largest, their big Nyngan solar farm. In the time from when they made what's called their FID, their final investment decision, so they said, yes, we'll put the couple $100 million into the project, to when they actually put the order in, the PV cells were 40% better in just 18 months. So they were 40% better in that time. And when they were putting the project in, the first half of the project took them 9 months. The last half of the project took them 3 months. They got better at doing it. So they became more and more efficient. So absolutely, but we have to do it now. The technology is good now. It works now. And remember, we've got to remember why we're doing this. We've gone past 400 parts per million in terms of CO2 in the atmosphere. 480, we give up. The scientists uniformly say we've gone from 398 to about 404, 406, they reckon, in the last 4 or 5 years. It's accelerating. We get to 480 parts per million, we've cooked our planet. Record heat, the hottest year on record, 1.1 degrees of warming already there. You talk to senior politicians in Europe, around the place, they are absolutely freaking out. And the coal that we approved, the coal that has been approved by the coalition government in the last 5 years would absolutely decimate any chance that we could have globally of keeping our warming to below 2 degrees. Australia's the second largest exporter of coal, Newcastle the busiest port. Nature magazine said Australia's carbon budget is 600 million tonnes. That was 6 months ago. 600 million tonnes. That's the amount of coal that you can sell. We're selling 200 million tonnes a year. We've already done 150 million tonnes out of that budget. We'll smash that budget in the next 2 years, and we're exporting 200 million tonnes. And its contribution to GDP is less than parking fines and traffic fines in terms of royalties to the government. Parking fines and traffic fines are contributing more to royalties than coal mining. It's employing only 15,000 people. It's declining, and it's in terms of our state domestic product, it's about 3%. It's a joke. It's a joke. The industry really should be retired, and we should be putting the money into research and development for renewables.
Yep. Certainly, from an international perspective, this is absolutely true. What Jeremy was saying. Australia's image has enormously suffered, particularly less, unfortunately, due to what's happening here in New South Wales, but because of Carmichael in Queensland. This is an enormous story overseas, obviously, for one reason, Great Barrier Reef. Everyone knows Great Barrier Reef. So this is clearly true. In Paris, people who were there say that Australia was really already, to a certain extent, an outcast. That Australia was in a corner. And as Australians do in these international conferences, they come with their charm. You know, they're nice, cuddly, koala. I always call it the koala factor. Australians can do more or less everything. They can torture kids, but they're still nice, you know. But that will not go on forever, because if the impact of global climate change really hits the decision makers and their voters hard, at the moment it's mainly the poor people, you know, in Bangladesh and so, but if it hits them, they will come to Canberra and say, that's it, guys. You have to find other ways. So that will be one reason why Australia will eventually go out of coal, most of it. But the other one is the market. There's still no market. There's simply no market there for coal anymore. China, they want to go out for the obvious reasons. The Indians, you know, that Carmichael is probably never going to be built, because they can see that there is already too much coal in the pipeline. So, and here domestically, I think eventually renewable energy will be just cheaper. And that will be the deciding factor. It will be cheaper than digging out coal, destroying enormous masses of land and destroying community, who then obviously don't find it funny and will not vote for them anymore. So eventually the interest in coal will fade on a global scale, but also domestically.
And my other Greens friends are telling me we have to wrap it up. So we're going to finish it there. Apologies to anyone who didn't get to ask the questions or make their comments. Thank you everyone for coming along tonight, and thank you especially to our guest panellists tonight, Urs, Jeremy, Dimity and Peter, and Drew who's not here. It was a really good discussion. And please come along next month. It'll be the third Monday of the month back here. And we'll likely be discussing foster care. I think it's pretty much locked in that that's the topic, Jay. Yep. So foster care will be discussed then. And of course, as always, if you want to keep up with what's going on with the Goulburn Greens, head up our Facebook page, same as Labor, their Facebook page. And hopefully see you all next month. Thank you very much.